All right. So thank you everybody for signing in. I appreciate it. So I graduated here in 2009, right? I've had a kind of crazy journey. I started my entrepreneurship journey when I was 22. Kind of started when I was here in terms of crafting it. I'm 37 now, so it's been about I graduated when I was 22. I think it took me a little longer than it was supposed to. That 15-year career is what I want to go over with you guys, okay? And I know that it was mentioned that a lot of you guys are first-time or business students. A lot of you are kind of young in that journey, right? So in terms of my story, just so you can kind of siphon it down, right, and it makes sense to you, is I went the traditional entrepreneurship route, right? I went right out of the gate, started a business, and tried to create my own path. So if that's a path that you're interested in, this is, I think, a realistic interpretation of what that journey looks like, right? The highs, the lows, and all that good stuff, okay? So even with E-Town, I've given a few of these speeches before, but at other universities I've given them as well, and I always use the same PowerPoint. And this is no joke, hand to God. Yesterday I was sitting down, kind of putting together, I was going to send my email over to Nick, and I thought, I'm scrapping that old presentation that I did in the past, and I wanted to be as brutally honest about everything. I even texted my brother, who's sitting up here, and said, I'm going to feel naked. I'm just going to explain the whole goddamn thing, right? So this really goes through step by step of what that journey was like, okay? So we'll go through. All right, so what I'm going to cover, there's really been three kind of moments, for lack of a better word, in my career, in my journey so far. I started off, and that really the lion's share of my work was with a company called Bryn. It's a company that I created. Dane's my little brother right there. He was 8 when we started or something like that. Had nothing to do with it, but we used his name, and I'll get into what that company was. At a pivotal moment, we shifted, and I turned that brand into a new company called Foodie. And at that point, we went global. We opened up a lot in the Philadelphia region, and we opened up one over in Africa, and it was a crazy, crazy ride. And then it'll get to where I am now, and it'll explain why I am where I am now, right? And that'll go into kind of the next jaunt of my story, okay? And at the end, if we have time, and I'm going to go as fast as possible, we have a Q&A. Questions are welcome. That's always the best part. No questions makes me feel really awkward. So if you could even write down one, that'd be awesome, because then I don't feel as bad about myself. Starting off with this. You've probably seen this a million times, right? And it's like a cliche image. It's kind of that journey that a lot of people think when things are going well, it's this straight line, and it's not. But this image does kind of symbolize my entire journey so far. It's a ton of ups and downs, backward, forward, really high highs, crazy lows, back to really high highs, all in a different sequence. So it'll go over that as well. You guys might be too young for a little Biggie reference. But the way that it started, especially with Bryn, was this. And it started actually, no joke, at E-Town. I came into E-Town super overweight. My whole life, from up until now. Through high school, I rode. I was on the crew team in high school. Started off really big in high school, went down in weight when I rode, got to E-Town, had a little too much fun. I actually started at Temple, had way too much fun there, put on a ton of weight. And I realized I needed to lose weight. Thank God I roomed with a bunch of wrestlers, and they were cutting weight all the time. So I just perpetually cut weight. I just did whatever the stupid stuff. I was wearing bags and running. I don't know if the gym is still by Jay's Nest. I was running with sweatshirts and bags on and all of that, and just losing weight as quickly as possible. But in that process, and you have to remember, this is 15 years ago, at least. Let's say I was in college 17, 18 years ago. There was no healthy alternative in fast food. Right? There's nowhere to go to get something healthy. It's not like now where you can go eat healthy almost wherever you go. There's Whole Foods back then wasn't even prominent. So I wanted to create a space where it was as easy as possible for people to be healthy, right? So when they went in, they didn't have to do any homework. There wasn't any calorie counting on the back. We did all the homework for you. We were transparent. And I wanted to create as much of a fast food environment as possible. This is like when Chipotle was starting. There was no alternatives to conventional fast food. And that's where we really started. So that's kind of the startup part of my journey. That's Bryn. This covers the first 5 years. This first little piece here covers the first 5 years, right? These are the glory years. If I could encapsulate these years and repeat them, I would do it for the rest of my life. But unfortunately, things change over time. Here's the first video. And the reason I'm showing you this video is you'll kind of see the progression even of our media over time. when we started the brand, and I'll get to this in a second, we had no capital. Like when I say no capital, whatever you have in your pocket is probably more than what I had to start the business. And I didn't know what to do. I wanted to start this concept. I had no cash whatsoever, and I needed to figure it out. I actually contracted Jake Keeler, who used to work for this he graduated with me and then went on to work for this college. I think I gave him $100 to do this video. So you'll see the first video of Bryn and Danes. And just to give you a backdrop, when I was sitting and I wanted to start, a healthy fast food concept, my dream was huge. I'm picturing whatever you guys are probably picturing now. Big standalone building, drive-through, digital everywhere. I wanted all of it. I had no money. So what I ended up doing was, and I'll get to this in a second probably as well, is the first thing I did, and it kind of ties into the end of my story, was I knew I needed money. The Mark Cuban, before Mark Cuban, was a guy named Pat Croce, right? He owned the Sixers. He was a big, almost billionaire at the time. And to figure out what I was going to do, I knew that I wanted him to invest. I needed something. I didn't know what to do. And I also knew that back then, this is pre-Twitter, or Twitter was starting, to get to him, I had to do something novel, right? So what I ended up doing was I did some research on him. I found out that he was a pirate collector. He's actually the biggest pirate collector in the world. It's crazy. He has like ships and stuff. It's wild. I ended up I bought a treasure chest. I wrote my letter to him. I burnt the edges. I put like fake gold in there when it was so cheesy. When he opened up the treasure chest, there was a big picture of my face, so like he knew who I was. And I had it sent to his house so that he had a sign for it, right? And I knew if I went to that length, like I kind of guilted him, which is kind of a theme in my whole story, guilted him into a meeting. Like he kind of feel bad if I did all that and he didn't meet with me. Sure enough, it got to his house. I got to a call from, I guess like the next day or the day after, from his assistant who he had for a million years. He said, Pat said, whoever works this hard to get my attention deserves 15 minutes. Went to his house. I won't even get into it. House was freaking crazy. And anyway, I had a conversation with him on how to start. He didn't invest. And he said, start off as small as possible and prove the concept. And from there, grow organically, which I kind of already knew was an option, but hearing him say it kind of validated that kind of paradigm, right? So anyway, I didn't have any money again. I knew I needed about $350,000 to open a restaurant. I knew there was no way anybody was gonna give me $350,000. If they did, if you guys watch Shark Tank, you'd know they'd take all my equity, I'd be working for them, I didn't have any money, I just had an idea, right? So I ended up writing a letter to my grandfather, kind of guilting him too. And I said, hey, listen, I'll work for you for a year. If at the end of that year, I don't even know where, I came up with this number because it's not tax deductible. I said, if you give me $12,500 in cash at the end of the year, I'll work for you for a year, 4 days on your farm. And he gave me some money along the way. I worked at a Starbucks, I worked at a pizza shop. I did all this stuff to kind of gain experience and get that $12,500. We opened up our first Bryn and Danes location, full location with $12,500. And it's not too different than right now with the pandemic. Back in 2000, whatever that was, 2008, I forget what year it was, yeah, about 2008, the economy collapsed. You guys were like 3 probably, but the economy collapsed, right? Everything was closing. So what I did was, I went to the places that were closing, I called the corporate offices, I said, can I have your equipment? I gave them some sob story about being a young entrepreneur, didn't know what to do with myself, I really need your equipment. Got the equipment for free. Ended up negotiating a lease and saying, hey, listen, the economy's tanking, no one's signing up for your building for the next year. If you give me 7 months or 8 months free rent, I'll pay after that. So I ended up using all these kind of like little tools to really reduce, as far as possible, the amount of money it would be to start that business. So instead of starting this big glorious drive-through, standalone, tech screens everywhere, happy, 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 I started with smoothies and popcorn. That's all I sold. Didn't even make any sense. Smoothies kind of made sense, popcorn, I have no idea. But it was cheap and I could pop popcorn and I could make it low calorie and I had something else for them to buy. So we started off selling smoothies. Actually last night when I was doing this presentation, putting it together, it was like a memory fest going through all the old stuff. We were selling smoothies for $3.75. If I would have charged more, I probably wouldn't be here today. We would have done much better, but I didn't even know. I looked at a smoothie and said, what would I pay for it? And that's kind of how I did my price analysis, right? But anyway, with that first $12,500, 100 of it went to Jake to make this video. And this kind of will explain this little first step of my story. And if I look really skinny and handsome, I don't know what happened. It used to be better than it is now. Is the audio on?
Hi, my name is Bryn. For
the past few years, I've been on a journey to answer the question, how can I make it easier for people to be healthy? To find that answer, I took to the road and had some fun. I packed my things into the truck and traveled for a few months all over the country. I spent a little time flipping some burgers to the Gulf Coast, helped build a farm, and have been known to jump out of a few planes. All along the way, I've made some great friends that have helped me find my answer. That answer is Bryn, an all-natural in-and-out location that offers incredible smoothies, buckets of flavored popcorn, fair trade coffee, barrels of brewed tea, and everything else to keep you healthy throughout the day. Having no unhealthy choices makes Bryn the truly healthy alternative to snacking on fast food. This journey has been amazing, and I have finally found my answer. We're going to change the way the world eats, starting right here on Horsham Road. I can't wait to share Bryn with you.
The place that's awesome. So I get it. What? Yeah.
So that was our start. Very modest, right? There's Jake's logo at the end. I let him do that. I gave him $100. I figured he deserved to have his logo at the end. Does this bring me back? Please tell me it does. Boom. So like I said, we started that first location, and you can see it here for $12,500. I took every penny I had to make it an experience, to make it feel like when you walked in, you were somewhere else, right? If you noticed, people sitting on the ground, that's because we couldn't afford chairs. IKEA had these things you could sit on the ground. You're sitting around barrels. I wrote a letter to Jack Daniels explaining our story and begged for them to give me barrels. They ended up sending me 8 barrels for free. The place actually smelled like whiskey if you opened up the little cork on the side. It was wild, but we hustled it and we made it happen for that $12,500. So this is kind of the next jaunt, right? So we started that first location. We got it humming. I knew that back then social media was new. Mark Zuckerberg and I graduated, I didn't know him, graduated the same year of college, right? So there's all these loopholes in the Facebook system to kind of get as many people as possible to follow you. So early on, we had more followers for Bryn and Danes, and this is pre-people knowing about social media. It was mostly college kids at that point. We had more followers than there were people in the town. It was wild. So really, we ended up creating like this little tech media company that happened to sell food. And that's what worked for us, right? Driving people in, we only had smoothies and popcorn, driving people in through social media to get through our door and getting a huge following, which we did, and it was awesome. So over time, what I did was I saved up that money. I still lived at home. Dane's right here, he was baby. I shared a room with him. I was still living at home. I didn't want to spend any money on anything, right? And with all the money that we made, we slowly started adding in like equipment to make food. And before long, we became healthy fast food, which I finally put that sign up. We went from doing a couple $100 a day, and I thought I was rich, to doing a couple $1,000s a day once those words were combined of healthy fast food. Back then, that was provocative. Wasn't happening anywhere else. We literally, I remember we called it throw up busy back then. When we put that thing on at lunch, we would have a line that went right out the door, and we were doing 10 times the amount of revenue, literally, in one day once we added those options. So with that capital, I still had this dream of wanting to open up a full location, right? So I needed some side hustles to get the capital to do that, right? I still had a little bit of money, but I was buying food equipment and whatever. So the first hustle was we opened up a pop-up location back before they were really called pop-up locations on the Ocean City Boardwalk. It was dope. It was really small, same thing, a little bit of food, lots of smoothies, but we had this big following, so when people went down the shore, it got really busy. That's a picture of the location. It was really cool. We had like misters so that like it was cool people off. It was wild. That was our first crew. I had to put that picture up because in the beginning, the people that work for us bought into this whole mission, right? We were only selling smoothies and popcorn, but when you walked into the location, there was a big mission statement on the wall that said that we were going to change the way the world eats, and everybody bought in. The girls that worked there, those 3 or 4 right there, were working like 70 hours a week in the summer. It was crazy. I bought the location, or I rented the location on the boardwalk, and we got them a house. It was like a sorority house that happened to work at Bryn and Danes. It was wild, and it was a great experience. Number 2 was, I reached out to a guy to get a truck just to deliver some food. He said, I don't have a truck, I have 2 FedEx trucks. and somebody owes me money, they gave me the trucks, what can you buy the trucks for? I offered him $17,000 for the trucks. He gave me 2 trucks that were worth $40,000 each. I kept on thinking, well, they turn around and sell them at worst case scenario, but let's use them for a little bit. So we had 1 truck that we took on the road. I mean, we went on a road trip following a band from here through Florida, up almost through Texas, and we got into Louisiana, and we kind of used it as our road truck, and this one we use as an event truck. We never really used them as that kind of park and pray method where you park in the city and just pray to God people come up and buy food. I hated it. So we'd contract these out, and people would have them for events, and it was really fun. So between that first location, that the rent was again like free or nothing, and these 2 food trucks, we ended up kind of realizing that dream. We got that full standalone location, we got the drive-through, we got the digital screens. We did it with $60,000 because we just moved things right down the road. And it's crazy because this location is what I wrote our original business plan about. The first business plan when I was in the room with Dane was, if I ever got this building, I'm gonna be able to do some damage. This building became available, crazy story, we got it for crazy cheap. And we opened up our full location. And that was kind of the realization of our dream. That was a huge moment. The numbers that we did out of this location were bonkers. We were still selling smoothies at like $5, but doing like close to $2 million a year in revenue. And I didn't even know what was going on. I was like a kid. I was like 23 or 24 years old. It was a wild time, and probably the best time that we ever had in business, if I looked at it objectively. So then came the capital raise, right? And this is something important, especially if you do want to go into entrepreneurship. This is something we were really good at, right? The food part, I'm not a food guy. This is the part where we really excelled, right? So I realized that if I wanted to open up a bunch of locations, which I did, right, I needed to raise some capital. So I ended up kind of networking it, right? And one thing, again, if there's anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur in here, the trick of the trade is a couple things. Number one is you got to act like you don't need the money, because if you need the money and you're desperate, they're going to kill you. So we had to act like we didn't need the money, right? The second thing was kind of, we were 1 restaurant, right? And I didn't want to raise money because I wanted to raise like, a couple $1 million. I didn't want to raise money and lose all my equity in the brand. So you had to puff up everything around you. You had to puff up that we had a ton of social media followers. You had to puff up, sign some leases and say, we're already going to open these with or without your money. And you create a little momentum. You create a market where a bunch of people have the fear of missing out. Like, oh God, I got to hop on this ship. Creating that market, creating a little bit of FOMO before FOMO was FOMO was the ticket, right? So I use things like I put this up there not to puff out my chest, but this was one of the headings that was in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I put this everywhere. Every time we talk to somebody, I put this front and center. I put our social media following front and center. I put all of our aspirations front and center. And it worked. It worked to a crazy level. So we started off with that $12,500, and I ended up talking to a group of investors, and I'll never forget, I was an Ambler PA sitting for lunch. I'm thinking I don't even know what the value of the company is. I don't even know how to figure out what the value of the company is. And the guy that was sitting there said, just nonchalantly, I think the business is worth about $14.5 million. I almost died. He could have said like $140,000 and I would have been fine. So I just ran with it. I was like, okay, sounds good to me. So probably the beauty of this piece of our business was I only needed a couple $1 million to open up as many locations as I wanted. And he said, I'm worth $14 million. So I'll give him I'll raise $2-3 million, which we did, and I'm only going to give up 20% of the company. So at this point in time, we were golden. I had 80% ironically, the guy that invested, his last name was Golden. We had a few $1 million. I still had 80% of the brand, and we were off to the races. This is what ended up happening, right? So we had our first location in Horsham, still rocking it. We hired a dope corporate team. We had about, at one point, probably 8 people working in our offices. We ended up opening up in Plymouth Meeting, which was our best store. We ended up opening in Bryn Mawr, small one in Ambler, one in Malvern, PA. We still had the trucks on the road, smaller one in Horsham, and it kind of crescendoed with this opening in Philadelphia, which was insane. We hired a PR company. The opening day was absolutely nuts. At this moment in time, with all of these things spinning, it was an awesome time. Like I said, I still own almost all the company. We had a great team. We had some money in the bank. We were rocking. It was unbelievable. I said end scene because if I could, I would have stopped it right there for that moment. for reasons that ended up being my fault and reasons that didn't end up being my fault, which will come in a second. But in that moment was the best time that we ever had as a brand. If I go back, not only do we have these, I also had the capital and the leases for 3 additional locations, a few in New Jersey, 1 in Pennsylvania, and I actually signed a lease in Uganda because I wanted to spread the love, right? And we created this program where people could round up their change. We sent the money over, they opened a location, we just give it to them. All this stuff was in motion. It was a pretty wild time. Again, I wish it would have ended right there. A perfect storm happened, right? Now this is kind of when you guys have developed, this is only a couple years ago, right? This is when the pandemic hit, right? And when the pandemic hit, it was bad. It wasn't just bad because of pandemic, like it affected all businesses. Us specifically, especially in Philadelphia, you couldn't even go in. It wasn't allowed. So you're delivery only. Even the suburban locations, everybody's masked, everybody's panicked. We saw our revenue go down like 75% at least. It was horrific. It changed our world entirely. So I'm thinking, okay, we built this whole brand on momentum, on this story of us growing, blah, blah, blah. I need to change the narrative, right? If I change the narrative, maybe I can beat this thing, because there's no end in sight, right? We're still kind of dealing with it now. In Philadelphia, I think I don't know if they changed it today or yesterday, but you still had to wear a mask to go inside, which really affects your revenue, right? So I knew I needed to change something. I knew I needed a new brand. I needed a new story. I already had the audience. I already had the followers. If I could just twist it, maybe we can get through this thing. So some bad things happened after the pandemic. This is where I'm being honest with you guys. Number one is, one of the worst things I ever had to do was put our company into bankruptcy, right? It's a big, scary word, but if you really look at, there's different chapters, different types of bankruptcy, right? In Chapter 11, if you do it honestly and correctly, it's an opportunity to restructure your brand, right? A lot of people just use it and then die and you don't have to pay your creditors back, but we did it the right way. So we consolidated down. We said, okay, which stores are doing really well? We'll keep those. The rest of them, unfortunately, we'll have to part with, but we'll use this, Chapter 11 to not really get in trouble for it because it is what it is. It's the pandemic, people understand, yada, yada. What I decided to do was change the brand entirely and change the focus entirely. Number one was, within our sector of healthy eating, that plant-based diet was exploding, right? And I had been vegan at that point for a short period of time. In college, I was vegan. I said, we're gonna go 100% plant-based, and we're gonna really focus on this global expansion, meaning at one point it was going to be for every location that we opened, we'd open up one overseas. The one that was here, that was rounding up their capital, it would slide over. That location would prosper with a little bit of help because in Uganda it wouldn't work on its own. So that's what we did. We piloted that first global one. We kept the locations that were working, and we repositioned into a brand called Foodie overnight, right? This is 2020 to 21. This was an okay year. It wasn't too bad yet. Things were pretty good still. So I kind of went back to that original kind of thesis where I went back to the drawing board, right? This sounds cheesy. I know it's in cheesy books, but I love it and it's worked for me so far, right? Is get it all on a board. In the center there, we had all of our corporate structure. I had everything that I wanted the branding to be. I had it all in one spot, and that kind of turned into our aspirational foodie world, right? Here's all of our locations here. Here's what we're doing overseas. The one overseas we had almost done already. We were working on a smaller market. We started a very small goat sanctuary, which was very fun and had a fun video. But I was walking through this field and I didn't know what it was, but in Uganda, they don't have like slaughterhouses, they have slaughter fields. I was in a slaughter field. They were about to kill this goat. I can't explain it. I'm not like a really soft guy. I'm not a bleeding heart guy. I died. I was so sad for this goat. Not only that, the goat had a daughter. So I was like, shit, like, what are we gonna do? So I think I had $60 in my pocket. I offered the slaughterhouse $60 as long as I could get the mother and the daughter. They let us have them. I ended up taking it to this pasture, and there's this little boy from the Congo who'd never, ever shut up. Like, it's almost as if he had like a disease of speaking. And he spoke all the time. We would go on car rides with him. I don't even know why he was with us. He would go on car rides with him and he just would not shut up. So I made a deal with him. I gave him a little bit of money and said, hey, listen, these goats need love. They almost died. Instead of talking to humans all the time, why don't you start talking to the goats, make them happy? So he did. And we started our very, very modest goat sanctuary. Here's where things kind of develop. And you can see, the reason I put this up here is because you can see that our means changed, meaning we were able to do more. The brand had kind of manifested into something larger and stood for something larger. And here's the video of what we did in Uganda.
Emergency legislation.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. This also embraces the moment a bit. So you guys remember when the pandemic hit, like that morning, right, when everything just started breaking? Our reasoning and our logic behind moving to Foodie is encapsulated in this video. It wasn't a lie. We had to change things and change momentum a bit, right? So anyway, here's the video that we launched. And I think by the end, it's got almost 1 million hits, which was awesome.
Emergency legislation shuttered businesses across the province. Restaurants and the people who run them and work in them will want the hardest hit.
We're seeing the demise of our favorite restaurants.
That many restaurants may not survive the next few months.
At the beginning of 2020, really, we were faced with two options. First, we could panic, stick our heads in the sand, and hope that we could just look into the Foodie is a food concept ecosystem that I have been brainstorming for the past several years. It's a brand that's defined by its values. It's as easy to say whether you're in Philadelphia, Entebbe, Argentina, or anywhere else in the world. It was obvious to me that we needed to make two critical changes to our model in order to directly impact the fast food industry. First, it's time to go entirely plant-based. Foodie will not sell any meat or products that derive from animals. Simply put, it's time to make this adjustment. We've been charting this transition for the past several years and have used this time to convert our locations into entirely humane spaces that are free of any animal products. Maybe even more excitingly, we were blessed to collaborate with some of the most amazing and acclaimed chefs in the country to put together a menu that is simpler and has more flavor than anything the plant-based or regular fast food world has ever seen. Second, we had always known we were different because we just valued things differently. We measured things differently. We were never as drawn to profits as we were to our mission to change the way the world eats. As we begin again, we realized we want to do something profound. We want to do something that's never happened in our industry. We want to do something the world's never seen before. We decided, let's give the restaurants away. We realized it was time to give our platform to communities in need that dealt with things like food scarcity and food insecurity, or that were in food deserts. Let me get this out of the way. We are not the saviors here. We don't want the ownership. We don't want any money. We don't want the credit. We're driven by the idea that we can build a network of like-minded people who can make a difference in our food ecosystem. At its core, we just believe in two words: opportunity and access, which this food platform provides. Foodie is here to punch traditional fast food in the face, and I say that because I feel as though they've taken advantage of the world for too long. From things like contributing to a national obesity epidemic, being notorious for low wages, relying on factory farming, and ignoring the effects that practices like this have on the environment, to really just being an embarrassment for this country. Fast food has needed an answer, and that answer is Foodie. To our thousands and thousands of supporters and fans, you are our largest blessing. We love you, and our evolution would not and will not be possible without your continued support. Thank you so much for everything, Bryn.
All right. Oh no. Nick, I might need your help, brother. How do I make this, how do I show this as a thing? Oh, I got you. Shit. Boom. All right, so you guys saw that video. I'm going to ask you about it in 1 second. But this ended up being our first location in Entebbe, right? And this was kind of before we were completely done. We ended up using this as you order and you pick up, kind of like the old school first Bryn and Danes. It was pretty awesome. Over here, we actually turned it into a bar. I didn't want like hard alcohol or whatever, but I wanted people to be able to, you know, watch some sporting events over there, football or soccer, whatever you want to call it, is really, really popular. And I wanted this to be a community center. We gave away free wireless internet. Again, that access component was key to me. I thought as long as individuals had access to the free market, especially the American market, they could start their own businesses, right? We ended up buying a kiosk on the center that we were going to turn into a place where you could rent computers by the hour for free as long as you just brought them back. And this was supposed to be, and was for a while, kind of the community center in Entebbe. I had been there like 7 or 8 times. I was deeply entrenched in that community, right? It was, I thought at one point I could live there. It was an amazing, amazing place to me. One thing I want to mention too is that the way that I looked at it was not as a chain of restaurants, right? Again, I'm not a food person. I didn't even work at a restaurant before I opened my own, right? To me it was, can we kind of flip the script and turn a chain of restaurants into an ecosystem where they all win off of one another? We'll make sure the ones here are busy. As long as they're busy, they'll have a trickle-down effect to help the one overseas. The one overseas, they'll have capital to do whatever they want with. If they want to open up more foodies, great. If they want to do something else, great. It was creating this ecosystem that all fed off one another, and that's what I got really excited by. I wasn't excited by a chain of restaurants. It wasn't my thing. But this idea of kind of changing the paradigm of how people eat was super, super exciting. The next one is the last video, I promise, but it kind of shows how it was coming to life. This was on Fox Philadelphia. This guy's the nicest guy in the entire world. The guy that has his mouth open right now. Can I make this louder or no? Thank you, Dimitri. Let's turn it up. Hopefully this works.
Try this. Volume control on this.
Yeah.
It's all the way here.
All the way? Put it up, Matt. Put that up, man. Put it up.
Let's see.
Beautiful.
2020 phone. And they decided to
All
start
right.
over. 2020 phone. And they decided to start over. The company's going in an entirely different direction and approach with its newest business model. They're rebranding themselves as Foodie Fast Food and introducing a 100% vegan menu. They also opened a location in Uganda. So joining us now to explain all about the new approach, Bryn Davis, the founder and president of Foodie Fast Food, and Feni Materio Jamal, the president of Foodie Fast Food Uganda. Good morning to both of you. Good morning. So thanks so much for getting up with us. All right, Bryn, tell us how this started. I'm actually a fan. I used to get a lot of your food Plymouth meeting when you were still Bryn and Danes, so I'm very familiar. Why Africa? Why expand in this model?
So I guess at this point, probably about 4 years ago, I went on a humanitarian trip over Uganda and met some awesome people, including Feni. And I think in the beginning, to help out, when I got back, Feni and I established a relationship, and I wanted to help out with bills and do all those things. So my group of friends could live a little bit easier. And I realized rather than do that, I think it made more sense to give them a business model, something that would perpetually give back and actually make sense and was sustainable. So it started off as like a very typical situation where you just have friends that are helping out, and then it kind of sparked. I thought it would be a great idea to give them something that I think would lead to more opportunities than just having nutrient-dense food.
That's interesting. So, Benny, what are some of the biggest things that you've noticed since this kind of foodie partnership began? I see you all decked out in the foodie gear and branding.
The opportunity that we've given in the community, and also how we've changed the way people eat here. People are eating healthy, and with the plant-based, this is a new thing for a lot of people here, and so they're really excited about it. But we've given people opportunities, just like me, from nowhere. I'm now a businessman, an entrepreneur, and yeah.
I love the opportunities here that are being created. Now, Bryn, the menus are pretty similar at all locations. So tell me about, I've got some of the food in front of me.
I guess that's the end. It had to be a minute for social media. Shoot. All right, so anyway, you can kind of see, though, that was good. Fenny taking a picture of himself on camera was one of my favorite things that ever happened. Someone help me out. How do I start? What's that? From this current slide. So as you can see, we started creating that ecosystem, right? Super exciting time. Fenny's doing well. He has a bunch of employees that work there, and we start to hum a little bit. And again, this is in the middle of the pandemic when some of our locations are closed. So I'm just trying to establish momentum, stay relevant, and keep the boat flowing, right? Or keep the boat going forward. 21 to 2020, 2021, 2022. That's now we're like now, right? This was a rough year. There's no highlight reel. There's no big pictures. There's not some big announcement, right? Things are kind of coming to reality, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're a year in. Things haven't changed. I've still got locations that can only operate on a small level. We're in a little bit of trouble, right? So this is my highlight reel, and this is what happened. One of them being kind of notable, especially in the moment. First, it's 2020, 2021. The restrictions are horrific. I can't do anything. We have to turn into a delivery model. We're not a delivery company. Delivery was like 2% of our revenue. I got to now make it like 50, otherwise we're going to be in trouble. Number two is a cancellation assassination attempt, right? So you guys saw the video. I'm not asking you for opinions. If I am, if you support me, but if you don't, I don't want your opinion. So in showing that video, like I said, that and that first video that you saw before that kind of explained the business model, right? I kind of thought, this is pretty cool, right? We're going to do well, they're going to do well, we'll all prosper, whatever. I was attacked by, I won't even give the name because I hate them, but they had about 1 million followers on Instagram, right? And even though I was only in that video for maybe 3 seconds with my hat on, I think I was going like this, it turned into, why is this white dude going to Africa and helping out, right? And why isn't he helping local communities? Which is a valid argument, right? But to me, I mean, I'm in Philadelphia, I go to Entebbe all the time. It was a very natural progression. That's a place that was in most need. And most importantly, for me to open up a location in the US that would have done the same thing would have cost me $100,000, $200,000, I didn't have any money. So this was the progression. However, that packaging of me as the white guy going over to help in an African nation turned into something enormous. I mean, I know I responded to 2,000 emails, which took me 2,000 messages online, took me a lot of time. I'm talking about like death threats, police involved. At one point, the FBI was involved. It was crazy. So you add in the pandemic, which is brutal, add in this component, which is taking my entire mind, and there's a lot of like government promised relief that never came. We were in a tough spot. It was a very, very, very challenging year for restaurants, and for somebody who leveraged so much on the future and all that excitement, it was a super, super bad year. So I made the hardest decision, and Mark, I brought that award you gave me in case you want it back, because this decision kind of altered things. But I promise I'll earn it again in the future. So I had to make a decision, right? Like, do I stay on this ship, right? We're already condensed. We had almost like 8 locations. I'm down to like 2 or 3, right? I don't see an end to the pandemic. I don't see an end to any relief coming, and we needed that relief to keep staff and all of those things. So I had to make a decision, and it was a decision that if you would have told me 5 years ago I had to make, I would have had to been institutionalized, right? Since I don't know how old you guys are, but from your age to my age now, I had one dream, and I put everything into it. Even when I made money, I put it all back into the business. I live in a little tiny house by myself, and I put everything back, especially with the Uganda experience, all the capital back into the business, right? I had all the chips on the table. And with all those chips there, I had to make the toughest decision ever. Do I continue to ride this out? And me thinking like, okay, I gotta wait till the end of the pandemic. I gotta create momentum and a market again to raise money. And after all that's done, I'm gonna get back to the amount of locations that I had when I was 29 years old. And I made the decision, it was time to hop off the ship, which was seriously, minimizing it now, but it was probably the toughest decision. I can tell you where I was when I made it, but it was heart-wrenching, right? Put your soul into something and it just doesn't work out. I could have done a lot of things differently to get through that pandemic, and I didn't. The reinvestment and doing things overseas, if I would have stayed small and just reserved that capital, could I have made it? Probably. Tons of lessons learned on how to manage money. Some of it was my fault, some of it was pandemic. The cancellation, assassination was tough, but all those things combined together made me realize it was time to move on. So, you know, and this is another thing, if you guys are looking into entrepreneurship, I remember I called that bankruptcy attorney, and he said, what are you going to do next? And I gave him the spiel of like, you know, I'll work for a company for a few years, and I'll figure this out, and, you know, whatever. And the thing he said to me, and I knew he was right, but I didn't want to tell my family because they would kill me. He said, dude, you're not ever going to work for somebody else. It's just not going to happen. He said, your brain's not wired that way. You've been this way for 15 years. You're going to be an entrepreneur again, whether you want to or not. And it's true. If any of you are considering entrepreneurship and are really diving in, and obviously that's a huge commitment, it's kind of a lifelong commitment. Once you put 15 years into working for yourself, you know, going to work for somebody else is a little bit weird. I'm doing something on the side now, and having to report to somebody is mind-boggling. It's good and it's humbling, but it's a little different. So I did like what you guys probably do now, right? I had to go back to step one at 37, which is freaking hard. I did this simple checklist of what am I passionate about, right? Truth was, if I looked in hindsight and was being objective, I wasn't a food guy. I ran a bunch of restaurants, and I'm not a restaurateur. I was kind of an idea, let's grow and do crazy things. What are my strengths? Well, I was really good at raising money. I was really good at those kind of things. Wasn't very good at how to run a kitchen, right? I also wanted to look at what the next wave was. Just like in the beginning where the fast food world was changing, and Chipotle didn't happen yet. All we had was like Taco Bell, which I think is one down the road. I used to go late night all the time. The McDonald's, whatever. You know, I was riding that wave of the quick service that didn't really exist yet. So I had to find my next wave. And most importantly, I had to be willing to go back to work, which was really going back to like the drawing board, going back to nothing, right? Literally nothing. I didn't save any money out of this thing, and the lawyer's fees wiped me out. I was broke as a joke, right? So I'm not going to get into this. There's some stuff at the end if you want to scan, or if you guys want to ask me questions about it, that's absolutely fine. But you know, what excited me while I was in the kitchen at Foodie at the time was what was happening in Web3. What was happening in, I'm not a cryptocurrency guy, but what was happening in that space. What was happening in the NFT space, and what's going to happen next in the NFT space. Is that going to be the same way that I leveraged social media in the beginning to build a brand? Am I going to be able to do that through communities that are built in the NFT space, right? Is there ways to kind of maneuver and figure this out? And I was pretty freaking engrossed. I ended up becoming much more excited about what was happening with the next leg of my career than the one that I was in, which was one of the major reasons that I decided to exit, right? So I went back to the drawing board, right? I wish I had pictures from Bryn and Dane's when I was writing and typing away at my computer while Dane was sleeping about an arm's length away. He was a really cute baby. You probably saw him in that picture. I went back to my home office. My home office looks like Beautiful Mind without the intelligence. It's notes. You guys don't even know Beautiful Mind probably. It's a good movie. Notes everywhere. Every idea I had, everything that I thought, you know, what kind of made me excited was the way that media companies were going to work in the future, right? In Web3, when things are decentralized, the individuals have the power in a media company. I found that to be extraordinarily interesting. So I did crazy things, and what's nice about the second time around, if you're an entrepreneur, is you know the cadence of things, you know the order, you know what risks to take early on and not be scared of them, right? Because you have to take them anyway. So what took probably 2-3 years in planning Bryn and Dane's, I had to condense down to 2-3 months. I have a daughter, I have a wife, I have to make money, I have to hustle, right? So, you know, the progression of things is manic, crazy work to put together a document, right? Calling people in the industry. My brother's mad that I'm even bringing up this name, but it's like name dropping. I'm pretty pumped about this, right? But he was calling all the people that I used to know that got me where I was. The one really cool phone call. You guys just say yes either way. Are you guys familiar with Anonymous? They wear the mask, they have the hoods, they're doing all that kind of stuff. No one knows who they are. They're kind of like the first decentralized group, right? I was like, this group's awesome. Started watching a bunch of documentaries on them and all kinds of like people who were like hacktivists, right? Activists that were hackers. And I found the leader of Anonymous. And I called him. He's on exile on a canal boat in England because he's not allowed back into the US. He's telling me he has like documents about politicians, and so they'll let him. It was the craziest 50-minute conversation I ever had. But I picked his brain because they built one of the first decentralized groups, and I wanted to see how he did it. I went back to, I think I wrote Old Dog, New Tricks. Not really. Old dog, same tricks. I found the guy in media, had worked for very large media companies, was very, very successful, and I reached out to him in the same way that I reached out to Pat Croce back 15 years ago. I put together a box. I found out what his favorite drink was. I put a cigar in there. I would have put, anything in there to get his attention. Sent it to him the same way, got the conversation, got the green light, and then I went into the crazy work of mapping out how I think media work and how I think decentralized media will work in the future. This is kind of the cool part, again, accelerating that path as much as possible. This process, I left Foodie in February. It's April. It's only been a few months, right? But I put together that plan as fast as I could. I knew how to put the plan together. I knew what investors were looking for and all those kind of things. I ended up Mark Cuban had looked at my first company, which was really cool. He said, no, but I'll probably see you again in the future because I know you're going to be back around. That ended up happening. So I accelerated that networking, right? I accelerated creating that market. Instead of it taking a year, I needed to take a month. So I took what I call a manifesto, which was like what we're effing doing, right? And was able to meet the people that I wanted to meet the first time around but never did. That's the Mark Cubans, the Grant Cardones. I like calling him Martin Luther King Jr. Jr. I think he's Martin Luther King III. He's Martin Luther King's son. He's the man. I got our idea out to as many people as possible to generate attention. So again, I don't want to talk about what I'm doing next because I think why I'm here was what I did before. But if anybody wants to scan that code, that is my LinkedIn. Again, especially if we don't have time for questions. I think we do. We have a couple minutes. Ask me anything you want at all. If you need anything, I had so many people give me free things, help me out for no reason, introduce me to the right people. If you guys need that, reach out to me, especially because we went to the same college, right? But I'd be happy to explain, A, what I'm doing, or B, help you get where you're going, right? I would love to. So if anybody wants to scan that, connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm down. So that's my story. So again, kind of that roller coaster ride I told you in the beginning. High highs, crazy lows, and it positions where I am now, right? So that's my story. If you guys have any questions, which I begged for in the beginning, I'd be happy to answer anything. Oh no. I should have planted some questions with my brother so it at least breaks the silence. Yeah?
So what was your major in college?
My major, so I started off at Temple and I was a economics and political science major. When I got here, I had to graduate in 4 years. I became a marketing major and finished out here. So I was only here for 2.5 years.
So how did that lead to your life in entrepreneurship?
So, I mean, that's interesting. So in terms of the marketing stuff, which is interesting, because I don't know what kind of marketing classes there are now, but when I was in college, it was all traditional marketing, right? I don't remember what the acronyms were, the P's or something like that. But it changed dramatically because when I graduated, social media was relevant and it was free. So, you know, I used some of the stuff that I learned here. I used a lot of the values that I learned here, and I'm not just saying that because Mark's here. It kind of shaped who I was. But in terms of the actual skill set, it changed dramatically upon graduation. So, yeah. Anybody else? Brutal. One question. All right. So if anybody has any other questions, hit me up. I'd be happy to answer whatever you want. If you need any help, just let me know. And thank you very much.